Hello and welcome back to the EduPulse podcast. In the second of our In Conversations With, we're delighted to be joined by the father of instructional coaching, Jim Knight. Well, hello everybody and welcome back to EduPulse. Hello Adam, and well, let's welcome our very, very special guest here in our In Conversation With. It's Jim Knight.
Great to be here. I'm excited.
Thank you so much for joining us. Jim, why don't we crack on and maybe you can tell all of our loyal listeners a little bit about yourself.
I'm happy to do that. Grateful for the invitation. So my name is Jim Knight. I'm the founder of an organization called the Instructional Coaching Group and a researcher at the University of Kansas. I've been studying instructional coaching pretty intensely for 25 years. And I'm sort of excited to tell a little bit of our story and what we mean by instructional coaching and hopefully give people some ideas that they can use. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah,
brilliant.
fantastic.
Well, we sent some questions to you ahead of time, and I know Adam's been having a little chat with you in the meantime, which is so exciting because it's always nice to prepare a guest so we don't jump scare them with unknown questions. But listen, that might happen. You don't know. We're going to prepare for the unexpected tonight. So Adam, Adam, let's begin.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, firstly, Jim, just thanks so much for your generosity in not just being here, but also you said when we were talking pre-podcast as well that, you know, we can ask you whatever we want. And I think like that openness is really, really appreciated because it's something that's often kind of missing, I think, in education. If we can get like your complete, no holes barred, views on this stuff, it'll be really impactful for lots of people. So yeah, thanks for that.
I think it'd be better if you asked the what you might say are tough and challenging questions. You should go all in. I'm all for it.
Oh, that sounds like a challenge.
Yeah.
Well, I think I agree. I think it'll be lots more fun if we do it that way. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see if we can do that for sure. Should we start off though, just because like I guess I'm conscious of the fact that instructional coaching means different things to different people, especially at the moment as well, when there's so much discourse about it on social media and around the teaching profession. So for the purpose of our episode, what is instructional coaching? Like what's going to be our working definition of it for this chat?
So I'm going to try to keep this concise, but I think to answer that question, I kind of have to give you the 25-year history in hopefully like 2 minutes. So how did we come to study instructional coaching and what is it? So I started out using some teaching strategies that were really effective for me. And I became a trainer. I was living in Toronto. I'm a Canadian and I was working in education in Toronto. I went to Kansas to learn how to be a trainer in these strategies. And we used the term trainer back then. This is in the 90s. And I did the training and it was pretty much useless. It didn't have any impact on anybody. And people liked the strategies. They liked what I was sharing, but there was zero implementation. So at that time, Michael Fullen was at the University of Toronto. He's probably the world's leading expert in educational change.
Wow.
So I took a course with him, and then I did independent study with him. And he's kind of been my mentor over the years. This is right when he was writing a book, Change Forces. And I read everything he'd written up until Change Forces and part of Change Forces. And he introduced me to other people like Margaret Wheatley and Peter Senge. And all that work got me thinking about what's it look like to have effective professional development. So I went to the University of Kansas, keen to do a doctorate on professional development that translate practices into things that happen in the classroom. I interviewed probably 300 teachers, and we did a lot of different studies over the years. And then we started out with what we called a learning consultant. But then as I interviewed teachers, they said they really want to be treated like professionals. A consultant seemed kind of hierarchical. So we changed to instructional collaborator and then instructional coach. In fact, I wrote a paper for the Journal of Staff Development in about 2003 on instructional collaborators. And when it came back, I said, I think I'm going to change the name to instructional coach. That became the first article on instructional coaching. And then a couple of years later, I wrote the first book on instructional coaching, at least the first extended work on instructional coaching. That came out in about 2006, and we've been studying it since then. And when I say studying it, for 10 years, we had a study in Topeka, Kansas. And for 7 of those years, I was embedded in the district every day working with coaches. Wednesday or Friday afternoon, we'd get together and say, okay, what happened? What can we do better? How can we improve? And then we got some other funding for other kinds, in total, probably about $30 million worth of research funding to study coaching. Work with coaches in Beaverton, Oregon, Othello, Washington, and we continually refined and improved the model. And over time, we found some things worked, some things didn't. I gave 5 different presentations at the American Educational Research Association. And we kept refining the model for a long, long time. So this isn't just an idea I came up with. It's the result of long, careful study. And along with reading doing the research we were doing, working every day, every week with coaches, I was reading the literature on change, things like Miller and Rolnick's motivational interviewing. And I read a lot of Peter Block, everything by Peter Block, but also DC and Ryan's work and a whole bunch of other people. Even things like the philosophy of science and how dialogue functions in that. And so we continually revised the model based on what we were finding. When we started in 2007, our focus was on helping teachers learn proven practices. And so we said, we'll come and we'll explain a strategy to you, we'll model it for you, we'll watch you and give you feedback on how you're doing it. And what we found is our research model we call lean design research. It's kind of a variation on traditional, it's a combination of the lean startup and design research. And as we iterated, we found that teachers didn't sustain it when we focused on the strategy. And so over time, we decided we needed to start with changes in students first. And so that became a part of what we did. We found that video was really an essential part of what we did. And we integrated video into what we did. We found that checklists were really powerful, and we integrated checklists into the work we do. And so my definition is a product of 25 years of research, and it could well be different every year because we keep changing it all the time. But the definition would be something like this: an instructional coach partners with teachers. So that means they see themselves as an equal with the teacher. They see themselves engaged in a professional discourse with another professional. And they partner with teachers to help teachers get a clear picture of reality. Now, that clear picture of reality can happen in all kinds of ways, but the reality about reality is most people don't know what it looks like when they do what they do. There's a whole host of reasons for that. But when you hear your voice, if you're not used to hearing your voice on a recording and you hear it for the first time, it's kind of shocking. Watching yourself perform your professional practice is like that to the power of 10. There's a reason why athletes and performers all over the world watch themselves on video. So video is a big part of what we do, but it's not the only thing. So getting a clear picture of reality, then setting a goal. Now, we would say, I won't go into all the details, but we looked at what the literature says on goal setting, and we identified a process called peers goals. And the S in peers, there's SMART goals, so we figured we had to have an acronym too. We couldn't let them have the only acronym. So the S in SMART goals is student focused. We start with what's the change we want to see in students, and then we identify a goal, a strategy to hit the goal. So the instructional coach partners with teachers to get a clear picture of current reality, set goals, identify strategies to hit those goals, and make adaptations until those strategies help the teacher hit the goal. We found in our lean design research and our work in Topeka and Othello and Beaverton, we found that the strategy off the shelf usually doesn't work, and you have to make adaptations and modifications to make it fit the needs of the teacher. And we also found, unless the teacher cares about the goal, it's not going to happen. And so the way to help identify something they want to care about is to ask them what they want to see as a change in students. Start there, then identify the strategy and help the process work. So that's a very long way of saying, after 25 years, an instructional coach partners with teachers to identify a clear picture of reality, to identify a goal, a strategy to help hit the goal. Then they help the teacher learn the strategy and then make adaptations until the strategy hits the goal. Teacher hits the goal.
That's great. And
do we have any time left on the podcast? I think I used it all up.
I was about to say, join us next week for question 2. No, but that's great. I think it's really important to be thorough because it's not simple stuff. It's not easy stuff. There's a lot to kind of grapple with and get your head around with instructional coaching. I think it's better to be thorough than to be quick in the name of being digestible. I think it's important to kind of get people thinking, and that's definitely what you've done there with that answer. I guess my next question to that would be, and just listening to you talk about this idea of it's really difficult for people to be aware of what they're doing in the moment. And when people watch themselves back on video, they're really shocked to see what they're actually doing. And people's impressions of reality are not or perceptions of reality are not always aligned with what reality actually is. What's the relationship then between the coach and the teacher in terms of aligning the teacher's perception of reality with what the reality actually is, and what are the risks to the relationship in doing that? And the reason I ask that is because I think a lot of people would kind of buy into this idea of, or certainly subscribe to this idea of like, okay, we want to have that equal relationship between coach and teacher. We want that to be, we want equal value from both partners. We want a partnership rather than anything top down. Like, absolutely. I think everyone would agree with that. That's what we want. But is there a risk in how that initial kind of observation or view of the teaching process, is there a risk to the relationship in that?
Well, if I understand the question, I think, do the teacher and the coach have to have the same perception of what reality is? And I would say, no, they don't. Because first off, why do we think that a person who observes the class for 45 minutes or 30 minutes has a clearer picture of reality than the person who's in the class every day, who watches video or does something else? Besides which, you can tell them what reality is from your perspective, but they're still going to see the world the way they see it. So what you have to do is create an opportunity and I'm not even sure you can say, this is reality. I think what you can do is you can expand people's perception of reality by giving them different ways of looking at reality. So when I'm a coach, like let's say I said to a teacher, so on a scale of 1 to 7 or 1 to 10, how close was that class to a 10? And I'm thinking it's a 3, and the teacher thinks it's a 7. Well, we're going to go with her goal. I'm not going to say, well, actually it was a 3. I'm going to say, okay, well, it's a 7. So what can you do to improve and we're going to launch the whole coaching process that way. The notion that there's an objective standard of what should happen in the classroom, and I can pick it up in 45 minutes, to me is silly. What matters is how the teacher is going to act on what they think reality is. So my job is to help the teacher expand their view of reality and see more things. So that might involve video, might involve interviewing students. It might involve what we call as a close watch, where I would model a lesson in the teacher's classroom, and the teacher takes time to take notes on every student, looks at each student and says, what's that student feeling in this class? What's that student need? How do I feel about the student? Where are my emotions coming from? They get a deep understanding of what's happening with the kids. You could have a classroom discussion about how the class is going. You could look at student work, but I think looking at student work outside of giving the teacher a chance to either interview the kids or watch video is really powerful. Even audio is really powerful, because you'll see, oh my goodness, I talk 90% of the time, or the level of engagement was really low on the part of the kids, or nobody seemed to understand that activity. Like, video reveals all kinds of things you can't see. I wrote a book called Focus on Teaching, which talks about the power of video. So to me, what matters is how the teacher sees the class, because they're going to act on that. And so what I can do is I can help them get a broader, bigger picture of reality. Now, if I see something that I think is really important, I don't sit there like a lump and not share it, but I come from a place of humility where I say, well, here's something I was wondering about. I saw this. What do you think about this? And so that's what we call the dialogical approach. I don't hold back on ideas, but I don't try to talk them into my view of reality, because first off, I could be wrong. And secondly, the more I push my reality, the less likely they're going to embrace it anyway. So I think opening up the possibility of discussing things, that's kind of the way we would do it.
I think that's I think you're right. I think the idea of an observer going into a classroom and watching for any length of time, and then being able to shed this kind of life-changing light on what this teacher should be doing in a 15-minute feedback session, and then off you go and you're fine and I'll come back and see how you're doing in 3 months' time. I mean, I think that's like profoundly arrogant, and I think anybody we've got lots of trainee teachers listening to this podcast as well, and I think that's one thing that I would definitely urge any of you to kind of look out for when you're going around schools and looking for jobs, and talk to them about their professional development structures. And if you're hearing that kind of model, it's probably something I'd personally shy away from. But Jim, you said that okay, if a teacher said that a particular practice in a lesson was about a 7 out of 10 for where they'd want it to be, doesn't it require a certain a certain stability of mental model at that point for that teacher to be able to make that evaluation accurate, or does it not matter how strong their mental model is at that point?
Well, what we found, and I interviewed about 100 teachers when I wrote the book Focus on Teaching, is you need to give the teacher a tool for assessing their class.
Right.
And so we have tool. You can download all these things from instructionalcoaching.com. But so we give the teacher a tool for watch your students and a tool for watching yourself. And so if we have a collection of teaching practices, let's say it's Hattie's Visible Learning, or it's Brian Goodwin's The New Classroom Instruction That Works, or it's walkthroughs. We got those set of practices. Your observation is going to point teachers to those things, but it's going to look at how the relationship was built with the students, what kind of questions you ask, the level of engagement, your interactions with students, and it'll look at students. Were the students engaged? Were they responding to questions? And so we found, and we heard this in our interviews, that if you didn't give the teacher a tool to analyze the video with, they didn't get as great an insight as when they had some kind of sort of evaluative tool. Now, I don't have to necessarily see what they wrote on their evaluative tool. It doesn't really matter. What I want to hear is what they think about what they saw when they use the analysis. But giving them some, and then when you sit down with the teacher to talk about that assessment tool, that becomes a professional learning opportunity, because you can say, well, here's what we mean by ratio of interaction. Here's what we mean by time on task. And here's what we mean by opinion versus right or wrong questions. And so it's opportunity, explaining the form as an opportunity for professional learning, but then having the teacher use the form to look at their class is really helpful. So I think you're onto something there. That, I don't know if I'd call it the mental model, but I think they need, when you perceive reality, you bring a certain lens to it. Let's say your shoes hurt. You buy some new running shoes, and then you're going to take the subway home, and you've been wearing these running shoes all day and your shoes really hurt. Well, on the way home in the subway, you'll learn more about shoes than you've ever learned before, because your brain zoned in on that. And so you have to give teachers a tool to help them zone in on what we would say are the most important practices for the classroom. And we wrote a book coming out in a couple of months called Data Rules. It's all about, here's what research says about the best things to look at with respect to practice.
Okay, so
I feel like I'm just going way too long. You got to interrupt here and keep it going.
No, I mean, what I'll do is I'll interrupt, because just say no, because it's so wonderful to listen to you. I don't know whether there's something to be said about some maybe cultural differences sometimes, because we speak, particularly in the UK, to some teachers in schools where they're having this. They believe they're having a dialogical approach being put upon them, but what you're having is teachers who have been teaching for 30 years feeling really rather put out that someone's going to be coming into their lesson and telling them, the perception of coaching is that poor in some areas, that they believe they're going to be, well, what's this young upstart going to tell me that I don't already know? And that's a really difficult but very common starting point for a lot of the teachers that we encounter, and they're just good people trying to get through a very long day. And sometimes this, no matter how gentle the coaching model is, they're going to have an affront to it. So how important, therefore, is that buy-in? That sounds like an obvious question, but particularly for some of our new career teachers, how important is the buy-in to have that open mind to be coached? How important is that?
Well, these are such great questions, but they're pretty rich with possibilities. But one thing I would say is, when you teach concepts, they have always present characteristics. A triangle always has a straight line. If you see a curved line, it's not a triangle. Mm-hmm. And for me, an always present characteristic in the concept of professionalism is continuous improvement. And so the starting point is that people should be engaged in improvement. But in my experience, teachers are some of the most committed people you'll ever see. 3 weeks before school, they're in the Office Depot buying all kinds of stuff for their classrooms. If you watch a class first hour and watch it at the end of the day, they're learning all the time. What they don't want to do is they don't want to be treated like they're less than. They don't want to be talked down to. They want to be treated like professionals. And so for me, a coach is, the way we put it, is a second set of hands and a second set of eyes. And so the eyes they understand data really well to help teachers see. What data does is it makes the invisible visible. It helps you see students you might not see. And if I'm a teacher and someone can help me see things, in a respectful way that sees me as a person whose brain matters, treats me like an equal, doesn't dehumanize me and treat me as less than, but actually engages me in a conversation, and I feel they're helping me see my students more carefully, I'm going to embrace that. Well, the second set of hands part is that they have powerful tools to use, but I'm not being told, oh, you have to do this kind of questioning or you have to do this practice. The teacher works with the coach helps them identify, this is the thing I really want to work on. And the coach says, well, what do you think about these 4 or 5 possibilities? Which one of these gives you the most energy? Do you want to try one of these out, and I'll help you put it in place. And so coaching is a second set of eyes, a second set of hands, but it's also, the coach should see the strengths of the teacher and communicate that they see the strengths of the teacher.
Yeah.
So it should feel good to be coached. It should help you reach more kids, and it should save you time. And if it doesn't feel empowering, for lack of a better term, or you don't feel appreciated by the coach, and the coach isn't helping you do things that are easier or help you reach more kids, then you're right to resist. That's a waste of time. It should be helping me do my job, and I should be more effective. That's the heart of instructional coaching. And that's what I mean by 2 professionals getting together. It should be like 2 sports fans talking about their team, and there's this real sense of equality as they're sharing ideas, or 2 cooks getting together to talk about how they're going to make the beef bourguignon or whatever it is. There's just 2 brains going together. It's not me telling you what you did right and what you did wrong. And not only that, one last thing. Sorry, Adam, I heard you a little bit, and I was encouraging you to do that. One last thing is, our brains are designed to get pleasure from telling other people what to do. We get a dopamine hit when we tell the person what to do. Trouble is, as Michael Bungay-Stanier said in The Advice Trap, we think our advice is way more valuable than it is, and we think other people want it way more than they do. The reality is, telling the person what to do is probably counterproductive. It's not good for kids, because I'm keeping that person from learning. A better way is to say, let me share some options if you need them. I love this question from Michael Bungay-Stanier. He says, you've probably thought a lot about this. What do you think you might do? You just ask that question to start the conversation. There's a good chance they'll tell you exactly what you were going to tell them they should do. And it's going to be a whole different experience when it comes from them than when it comes from you. So anyway, Adam, you had a little blip in there. I heard it. There was something coming.
No. It's just the analogy there of the 2 sports fans is a great one. But when I think of 2 sports fans talking to each other, there's an awful lot of challenge going on between the 2 of them. And it takes me back to that idea of, okay, so the teacher says it's a 7, you say it's a 3. So to what extent is it the coach's role to challenge the teacher to justify that view? Whether the coach agrees with it or not, is there a role for challenge there for the coach to say, okay, justify that? And to my mind, I guess I'm thinking about, is that not an opportunity for the coach to draw down on the teacher's existing understanding of how teaching and how learning, more importantly, actually work?
Well, the bottom line for us is a simple thing: what's best for kids? And in my experience, when we challenge teachers in the way you're describing, it has more to do with me and my ego and my desire to be the expert and have status in the conversation than it has to do with what's best for kids. Why not treat the teacher like a professional in control of their classroom? And instead of saying, I'm not quite sure how you'd express the challenge, but be feeling that your job is to, I'm up here and challenge you. Why not say, here are some things I saw. What did you make of that? And get engaged in a conversation where the 2 of you are thinking together, as opposed to me trying to get you to do something I've determined you should do. I think what you want is a thinking conversation where both people are exploring it together and trying to think it through. And probably, given what I know about English soccer, probably athletic was not my best analogy to come up with. I was thinking about Australian rules football, where they're pretty friendly.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, I suppose it's, and you're right. I think the long-term aim is, or the ultimate aim is definitely to have that conversation where you're exploring something together. But some conversations don't start that way immediately. And is there I guess, and I'm going to come back to it again, I suppose, is there not a use of challenge here to try and engage somebody almost emotionally in the process? So, if I'm coaching Chris and Chris thinks this thing that he's done is like a 7 out of 10 on his kind of spectrum of where he wants it to be. And in my head, I'm thinking, I think that's a 3 there, Chris, because actually we're seeing the same thing, but we're just interpreting it very differently, right? So what we're actually seeing in terms of reality is the same, but how effective it actually is and the effect that it's having, we see that differently. for me to then say to Chris, okay, well, and you said there, you know, how would you pose that challenge? And if I was to say something like, okay, well, tell me what's led to you having that view. Tell me what's informed that opinion. And then Chris starts to talk through, and you know, maybe some of those. I'll give you an example, like a really concrete one that's just sprung to mind. Let's say like kids have come into Chris's class and he's teaching at the front, and he's set them off with this activity on the board, and it's really buzzy, everyone's talking to each other. And I asked Chris about that afterwards. So, you know, tell me about how the start of that lesson felt. And Chris says, and you know, maybe we use the scaling model that I know, you know, coaching models like Oscar talk about quite a lot. So, and Chris says, oh, it's a 7. I go, okay, tell me why you felt it was a 7. And Chris is going, well, it's so great, you know, they're buzzy, they're excited to be there, it's fantastic. But actually, from my perception, when I was walking around, I could hear them talking about stuff that took them completely off task. So to me, it's maybe like a 2 or a 3. Because I've then said to Chris, okay, well, what's your evidence for that? And that's then uncovered a perception that he's got, which I actually think is a misconception of what's going on. For me to go back and challenge him and go, well, how do you know what they were talking about was what you wanted them to be talking about? Is there not an argument there that by challenging him in that way, it kind of brings him into that conversation with me, where it's getting really, really targeted? He has to explain his thinking. I have to explain mine as well. He can challenge me back. He can say, okay, well, you know, you seem to be suggesting to me that kids being really buzzy, and okay, maybe they're off task for a minute, but you're telling me that's a negative thing. Like, what's your justification for that? Could that not be the start of that conversation that brings both people together?
Yeah. So if it works, do it, you know, is what I would say. If it works, do it. But I actually think you're disproving your point just by the way you're talking, if you'll allow me to challenge you a bit, because you took a long time to try to talk me to your point of view, and I don't buy it. And I'm probably less likely to buy it because of your argument. So I think you could approach that conversation with the teacher and say, well, first off, we wouldn't talk generically about the class. We would identify a big thing we want to work on. It could be, if we just pick engagement, it could be behavioral engagement, it could be cognitive engagement, it could be emotional engagement. But we also could be looking at achievement of kids. And we might be talking about, do we want them to acquire the knowledge? Are we concerned with transfer? We pick some goal to focus the conversation after the teacher gets a clear picture of reality. So once we've got the goal, and the goal has to be powerful, a goal that'll have an unmistakably positive impact on the quality of kids' lives. But let's say the teacher says, I really want my kids to be fully engaged in activities. We're gonna measure it by experience sampling or time on task, or some way we're going to get however we identify, we want 90% time on task. And I asked the teacher, you know, how do you think the first 10 minutes went? And the teacher says, actually, just what you said, they're all engaged, it was a buzz. And I would say, well, do you mind if I share something I noticed? And I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Okay.
I noticed that when I went around, it looked to me that the kids weren't actually doing the activity. But how did you see it? What did you think? Because here's the thing, it is a fact that people will only do what they choose to do. You can't force people to learn. You can get maybe minimal compliance, but if you really want people to be committed and embrace what they're learning, they have to choose it. And so what I'm trying to do by taking a dialogical approach, as opposed to trying to push from my point of view and talk them into it, I want us to think together, because then I think that will lead to greater levels of commitment. Otherwise, we run into this thing where I'm arguing and they're arguing, and you know, they'll say, I tried that last year, it didn't work. And I'll say, well, no, it's not like that. It's really like this. And they go, no, I don't want to do it. I've already tried it. We get in this vicious cycle of nothing happening. We're just trying to argue for the point of view. I would rather we think together, where their brain is fully engaged in the conversation and they don't feel I'm trying to put myself one up. I mean, Edgar Schein said, whenever we put ourselves one up and put one down, they're going to resist hearing what they have to say. And so I want us to be two equals working it through. Now, are there situations where you should challenge people? If someone has really low expectations for students, I think that would be a situation where you could say, I think they can do it. I think they can do more. I think none of these things are cut and dried in black and white. There are situations where challenges you're describing it might be helpful. But I think if that's your default mode for coaching, it's probably not going to lead to significant change. Significant change comes from conversations between two professionals where a really clear goal has been set, and then you keep hacking away at that goal until you hit the goal by first off adopting strategies and refining it. And then as you hit that goal, you can either move on to another goal, or you should see, if it's a powerful goal, you should see significant improvements in what happens in the classroom. And go ahead.
No, I was just saying, because I'm unashamedly very new to coaching, or even the conversation about it, having kind of perhaps heard it in other forms and other language used. And so I think my key takeaway from that is, if there is going to be challenge, it's probably going to be in an area that's specific. So Adam's example was generic, let's look at the class, whereas you're kind of saying that actually the goal should be set before the coaching moment happened, so that the thing that could potentially be challenged or looked at is already an agreed focus. So in Adam's example, would it have been better if we'd have already had a pre-coaching conversation where you'd have said to me, what do you want to work on? And I might have said, I would like to work on starter tasks and children's engagement, and I'm going to measure that by this amount of measure. And then you came and looked at that, and we had a specific conversation about that. I'm probably more likely to take a challenge on something of a target that I've agreed to, rather than a generic, how did that go? Because I don't think with young people in front of us, you'd never say to them, what did we do last week? Because that kind of generic approach doesn't. Have I kind of got a bit of a sense of what you're saying?
Well, I'm not sure that's a target you've agreed to. I think that's a target that you've selected for yourself with complete autonomy. And I'm not saying that that's always a bad thing, but is it the same thing as agreeing, as coming to an agreement on something?
Well, I think the thing I would say is we approach this from a place of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we don't feel like we have the solution.
Yeah.
We feel, and there's a recent book called Uncertain that explores the power of uncertainty, that good leaders are uncertain. And so when we approach the teacher, every class is different. Different classes of students in the class, neurodiversity, different communication skills. Every class is different. So I don't show up thinking I've got it all figured out and I need to talk them into what they have to do. I say, what about this? Let's try this. But the goal keeps you honest. Having a student-focused goal means we're going to have quality implementation to hit the goal, or it's not going to happen. And the goal needs to be powerful, one that'll make an unmistakably positive difference in kids' lives. And so when you've got a powerful goal, rather than me saying, oh, what about this thing that I've decided you should do? I think it's better to work it out together, like two professionals discussing it, Now, if it's your friend and you know how they work, and challenge, as you're saying, it is going to lead to a better conversation and better outcomes for kids, run with it. And there are certain situations when you have to you have to adapt to the person. And I mean, every conversation is going to be a little bit different. So there would be times when challenge works, but I think challenge is your default mode. I think it makes more sense to start from a place of appreciation and a focus on powerful goals. That's my default mode. I want to sit down with another professional and explore things together.
I think, like, totally. And the most refreshing thing from what you've said there as well is that there is this kind of contextual fluidity as well that affects the approach that you take. And I suppose, like, I'm coming at it a little bit from, so I'm a primary teacher, and at the moment I work in quite a large primary school. We've got like 22 teachers, something like that. But I have worked in a one form entry primary, so we've got like 7 teachers across the whole school. Like, everybody is in each other's pockets, like absolutely everyone, and you know every little thing about each other, and you're spending an awful lot more time together in that kind of environment. On the flip side of that, I've also worked in an all-through school that went from reception up to year 11. I found it much more straightforward to take the approach that you're describing, where you're working together with someone, when I've got that professional distance from them. So if I was always I was deputy head of primary in this all through, and if I was coaching a teacher who predominantly taught Key Stage 4, I found it much more straightforward to do that. Whereas if I was coaching someone who was teaching in year 5, then I'll be honest, I was finding myself defaulting more often to challenging them, but at the same time they were able to challenge me back as well. So it didn't feel damaging, but I absolutely take what you're saying, that I think in an ideal world, yeah, you would absolutely hit that collaborative space.
Great. Hey, I've got one more thought. About what you're calling challenge.
Yeah.
I think implicit in the concept of challenge, as you're describing it, is the idea that there's one right answer. And I have figured it out, and I'm challenging you to see my one right answer and agree with me. And I think when that's the dynamic for a conversation, it pretty quickly becomes positional. And I'm going to challenge you. You're going to defend yourself. I'm going to be a little more uh, directive, maybe. And I think when you take a dialogical approach, what you're saying is, let's look at this from as many angles as possible. Here's how I see it. How do you see it? Let's explore this until we come up with a really good solution. So to me, there are times to challenge people. I think a really good example is the one I gave, that when people have low expectations for students, I might say, I think they can do this. I think there are times when almost every form of communication is appropriate. But fundamentally, to work from the idea of challenge as my starting point for coaching is starting from the notion that there's one right answer. And I think that really limits your potential to do good. I think to really come up with a good solution, you've got to look at things openly. And so I say, well, here's what I think. What do you think? Let's look at our assumptions underneath it, rather than I'm trying to push for my perspective. Let's really explore this openly. That's what I'm striving for. And there may be a little challenge implicit that, but it's challenge grounded in respect for the other professional.
And I think, and just tell me what you think about this bit as well, but I almost think that, is there not a difference then between challenge in the way that perhaps it's coming across, and also challenge where the challenger is also prepared to be wrong? So for example, we were doing some work on checking for understanding with our whole staff in the context of science at my school. This is probably going back to the start of the last academic year. And we were looking at different strategies and when each strategy might be the best choice for the teacher to make when they're in that space of going, okay, I want to know what everybody's thinking, or I want to know as much as I possibly can what everybody's thinking. What are the different strategy choices that you've got? Which one is the best strategy for each context? And people started talking about cold calling, and this one teacher put her hand up and just went, "No, never. I'd never do it. Like, don't ever ask me to cold call. It's never going to happen." And my response to her was, well, why? What's your reasoning for that? Which I believe is me challenging her. Now, her response back to me was, right, I've got 7 kids in my class who have got severe SEMH needs at the moment.
Right.
It also does not fit with my style whatsoever. Like, it feels like I'm being mean and picking on them. I said, okay, so then how do you plan on solving this problem around making sure that every child in your class is accountable for listening and accountable for paying attention and accountable for thinking? How do you solve that without the use of that strategy? He said, well, it's easy. I just have all hands up. So I have an expectation that every child in the class puts their hand up for every question. And it feels much more positive because that act of raising your hand is like an active participation. It feels far more it creates far more of a community feel, and it works. So me, at that point, I'm like, great. Absolutely right. Go for it as far as I'm concerned. So although I gave that challenge in the first place, I'm challenging from the position of being prepared to be wrong as well. Is there a difference there?
Yeah, I like the way you described it. I don't know if I'd call it, I don't want to get hung up on vocabulary. I think being open to being wrong, and actually not so much being wrong, but being open to more than one perspective, and having a learning stance versus a positional stance, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's the way you describe it is the way we would take it. I want to respect the other person. I mean, I might have 3 kids in my class who are neurodiverse, and cold calling would send them right around the bend. I mean, they're just not going to be able to process that given their neurodiversity. If they're high functioning autistic, it might not just work for that particular student. And I think you have to, but see, here's the difference. We wouldn't focus on cold calling. We would say, what's the change you want to see in your students? The teacher says, well, I really want all my kids to be engaged, or at least 90% of my kids are engaged. Okay, now that you want to get them engaged, what strategy do you think would work? Well, I could look at questioning, or they might say, well, I have no clue. That's why I came to you. What do you got? And I would say, well, let me share some ideas I've used with other teachers, and you see if any of these ones give you confidence. Because I can't promise you that any of these strategies will work, but I can promise you if we keep working together, we will hit your goal, or at least we'll get as far as we can get. So we would start not with cold calling. We would start with the change in engagement. And then I would say, well, one thing you could try is cold calling. What do you think about that? Or one thing you could do is have more turn to your neighbor, think, pair, share activities, or maybe use thinking prompts, or look at your kinds of questioning. There are all kinds. Are the expectations clear for behavior? There's all kinds of things we could look at. And then teacher says, I think that cold calling sounds pretty easy to do, and let's try that. And then we try it, and it may or may not work. If it works, great. But we start with the change in students first, because that's what the teacher wants. And then we start with the strategy. And we found when you go the other way around, let's learn the strategy first and then apply it. Usually it fizzles out. They don't sustain their use in the same way.
And you know, I could not agree more with that. And I think,
Let's stop right there.
Yeah, podcast done.
That's it. See you next week.
But that is absolutely, you know, we've clearly there's a perhaps a disagreement around that word challenge that we were having earlier, which I think is
Right.
great as well. But there's certainly a commonality in here around the concern that instructional coaching, and this is what I see quite a lot in UK schools that are doing it without the implementation thinking behind it. Right, here are a lot of people going, we're doing instructional coaching, but actually what that means is completely different from one place to the next, and in some places it's wholly ineffective. And where it's ineffective, I think it's where people have gone straight for strategies and gone, here's a menu of strategies, choose one, and actually I'll help you choose one. Because then what you end up with is, I'm going in to watch my coachee teach. All we've talked about is this strategy, and so the minute I walk in the room, the coachee goes, oh yeah, I meant to cold call. All right, guys, here's a question. I'm going to cold call it. And that invariably ends up with someone using the wrong technique or the wrong strategy in the wrong context at the wrong time. And so I absolutely agree that a fundamental role of instructional coaching has got to be to get teachers to think. And there's a big piece of work I think that needs doing in this country around using instructional coaching to promote agency for teachers. But I think the only way you get that agency is by giving teachers structures to think with. And I think that a big part of that is having an agreed model of what the teaching process is, what the learning process is, yes, but also fundamentally what the teaching process is. And to me, it doesn't necessarily have to be given by one particular person. So it's not necessarily something that's handed down by an expert. But if you co-construct a model of the teaching process, or the elements of the teaching process, or just collectively subscribe to somebody else's, you have that as the start point for that thinking. And then coaching really can zone in on, we're working in this space. What are your options? What is your choice going to be? And what's the justification for that choice in that context?
Yeah. I think having a comprehensive way of looking at it, whatever it might be, is helpful. It gives you a shared vocabulary. But to me, maybe we're a little primitive, but to me, it's what's a really big change we want to see in students? And then let's try some things to see what's going to get us there. Let's draw from our collective understanding about teaching practices. And then let's keep working until we hit the goal. And what that does is it helps you prove that the strategy worked. If there's no change in kids, the strategy is not working. Mm-hmm. And so you need to have evidence that what you're doing is working, I think. And so starting with kids, figuring out what they need to focus on, helping using data, curriculum-based data or engagement data, the kind of data that's grounded in what's happening in the classroom, things like which kids are responding to questions, or the level of response from students, or wasted time. You know, there's a million different things you could look at. Quality of kids' writing, using a rubric to assess it. But the coach needs to be, I don't know if it's literate in data, but they need to understand data really well, so that they can say, well, are you more concerned with acquisition of this knowledge, or do you want them to transfer the knowledge? Or you just want them to make connections? And because if you want to look at transfer, we probably need a rubric. But if you're just worried about acquisition, nothing wrong with acquisition. Some things we just need to know it to get it. Then a multiple choice would probably work, and so forth. So the coach needs to understand how to help the teacher focus on the things they most want to work on. You know, the other thing I'd say is, I go into the conversation expecting to learn from the person I work with. Mm. I think, and I've heard people say, well, she's only been teaching 4 months. What's she going to teach me? But there's a book called Never Stop Learning by the director of business at Duke University. And he says he's all the most talented people he's talked to, they believe every person has something to teach. And who do you want to work with? Somebody who says, you've got nothing to teach me, or somebody who expects to learn from me? We probably want to work with someone who comes from that place of reciprocity.
I think
I think there's a big piece of work there around culture, right? And I think that the culture of the organization is so fundamental to that. If you're working somewhere where everybody's voice is valued and everybody has got something to offer, and where reciprocity is a big part of what the culture of the school is, I think you're far more likely to have that naturally happening in coaching conversations, because you're far more likely to have it happening naturally in other facets of the school as well. Sorry, Chris, did you want to jump in?
No, I was just going to say what I was really liking was that the child-centric nature of it all. Recently done some work with a trust, and I brought up the Hattie quotes, that every child deserves a good teacher, not by chance but by design. And that choice where it's being given solely to the teacher to improve self, to improve one's own practice, is the key driving force in the progress of our young people. And when you keep bringing it back, Jim, to what it's about, the kids, it's about that moment, what are they getting out of it, it's really refreshing to keep being reminded of why you're doing what you're doing. And the coaching you're taking part in is for the betterment of the young people. For me, I guess if you get something out of it that's for personal professional development, that's possibly a secondary or tertiary benefit to the process. And then I guess you kind of look at personalities, and like Adam says, culture and all go what you were about to say when we talk about Fulham earlier, and culture of change and all that kind of stuff is something that Adam and I are quite passionate about. And coming back to culture, I just think is a key point, Adam.
Yeah, I would say if there's no change in students, and not a trivial change, a powerful change, related to well-being or engagement and achievement, if there's no change in students, then the coaching hasn't worked. And then if you don't know if there's been a change in students, then you're not looking at the right thing. Coaching should be about unmistakably positive improvements in the lives of children. And if you set a powerful goal, and you, as a coach, have a repertoire of powerful strategies, we call it an instructional playbook, a small number of powerful strategies that are, there's a lot of different ways of looking at what research says, but the bottom line is, in our context, we've seen these strategies are really helpful to help teachers address their most common types of goals. And the coach can help the teacher implement those and make adaptations, make it fit that group. You're going to see a powerful difference in kids. If you focus on the strategy, it's possible, but you may not even know what kind of impact you're having. Another Hattie quote is, know thy impact. And I don't think you know your impact unless you start by saying, what's the change we want to see in kids? And I think that's the way we learn. We have a thing like I'm, you wouldn't know it by looking at me today, but I've spent a lot of time running. And I think as you're running, you want to make some adjustments. So then you talk to a coach, or you read a book, or you find something and think, well, maybe I need to change the shoes I'm using, or I'm going to eat a little different diet, or I'm going to work on my stride, or you fit the learning into what you're trying to do. That's the way we work. We don't start with the idea. We start with the change in students. And we use a process that's really, we call it freedom within form. We have a really trite structure, but it acknowledges that complex challenges require adaptive responses. Ron Heifetz at Harvard, who's a world-renowned leader in leadership, expert in leadership, he says the biggest mistake leaders can make is to confuse technical challenges with adaptive challenges. They try to come up with a simple recipe to a complex challenge. Well, if you try to fit some simple little strategy to solve all the problems in a school, it's not going to be nearly as effective as saying, what's your goal? And let's modify and adapt this thing until it hits the goal, to take an adaptive approach versus a sort of technocratic approach.
And doesn't that adaptive approach also hinge on the teacher having an understanding of what their options are? And then therefore, how important is it that coaches are ensuring that teachers are thinking about in any particular moment of a lesson, or in a teaching sequence, when you're trying to solve that big learning problem with that broader goal, how important is it that coaches are prompting and encouraging teachers to think about what all of the options are? Even if some options are really bad ones, they're still options, they're still there. How important is that versus a coach going, just a teacher coming out with one strategy straight off the bat, and the teacher going, yeah, cool. The coach going, yeah, cool. Let's go straight for that then.
It's hard to talk about these things because what I'm describing is probably a different paradigm, particularly than what's in the UK. but we don't see the coach as trying to do anything to the teacher, not trying to motivate the teacher, not trying to get the teacher to do that. We see them partnering with the teacher. Now, having said that, the coach needs to be an expert in effective instruction. Not going to do much good if the teacher comes to the coach and says, look, I got this problem. And the coach says, I got nothing. You want the coach to have things they can share that's going to be helpful. And they need to have a depth of knowledge. They need to know those practices really deeply so they can be nuanced and modified. They have expertise, but they don't act like an expert. They act like a partner. And so if the teacher already knows what they want to work on and the coach can help them go there, then that's what we do. They don't try to impose their ideas. But if the teacher's like, I don't know what to do, I'm stuck, the coach should be able to say, here are a bunch of different things you can do to help you with this particular powerful goal you've set. And I think it's in the application of the practices to a real life challenge, a change in students we want to see. That's where real learning takes place.
But in that coaching conversation, if a teacher comes up with a strategy and says, you know what, I think this is something that I should go for, is there space there for the coach to go, what else could you try? And that not mean, I think you're wrong, think of something else. Because I ask that question, and again, hands up, I ask that question regularly, and I never mean, I think you're wrong, think of something else. I genuinely mean, think of what all the options are, and then we can have a conversation about the context that will drive you towards choosing this instead of this.
Yeah. I'm trying to kind of process the question. I guess, I don't know if I'm being overly simplistic, but we just want the teacher to pick a goal that'll make a really big difference in the kids' lives. And then we want them to identify a strategy that they can implement effectively, not with fidelity necessarily, because fidelity might not work with this particular group of students. We want them to implement it effectively, which is to say it has a difference in kids' lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're exploring what those options are together. But I'm not trying to get them to do the thing that I think is right. John Campbell, who's a coaching expert from Australia, he's the founder and the director of Growth Coaching International. He says a less than perfect goal chosen by the teacher is better than the perfect goal chosen by the coach. Because if the teacher is really motivated to do it and they want it, and besides, who says I'm right? What makes me think I'm right? We're going to probably have to modify it anyway. So I think it gets back to this idea that there's one right answer. We don't believe there's one right answer. We believe you have to work it out. But what you'll know when it's worked out effectively is these kids couldn't write a paragraph. Now they're writing beautiful paragraphs. It's hitting all of our criteria. It's showing up in their performance.
And I suppose what I'm really interested in, and what I've been doing a lot of thinking about in this area as well, though, is this idea that I want teachers to engage with the process of thinking about teaching, not just arrive at an idea and then go and comply and trot out this strategy that they've chosen to do. And I suppose that's where I feel like I'm at personally with my coaching is, and maybe this is me going off on down a road that I shouldn't go down. I don't know, and I guess only time will tell how effective it is. But I suppose what I feel like I'm trying to do with teachers in that space is get them to think about all of those different options, because I want them to think about them. I want them to engage with the fact that they are the decision maker. It's not me as the coach that's the decision maker. It's them. They hold all of that contextual expertise. So what I'm trying to prompt them to do is apply that contextual expertise to the choices that they've got, and therefore to the decision. If they make a decision, and in my head I'm thinking, don't think so, I don't tell them that. I let them go ahead and try it, and then we'll talk about how effective or otherwise it was afterwards. But I would always let them go with their choice. But what I'm really interested in is, have they thought through that choice, and can they justify that choice to themselves?
I don't know that they need to justify it. I mean, I don't know. Like, it's pretty simple for me. I think they engage in thinking by thinking. And so I say, okay, you looked at the video. On a scale of 1 to 10, how close was that to your ideal? Why'd you pick that goal? Why'd you pick that number? What was going right? You didn't pick a 1, so what did you say went well? What could you do to take some steps closer to the goal, or closer to a 10? Do you want that to be your goal? And then when we go through a strategy and I describe it, I say, look, I've got this checklist here. Let me go through it. But if you want to modify it to make it fit your students or fit your teacher, you tell me the changes and I'll make the changes. If they say something that I think is a really bad idea, I say, well, I'm wondering about this. If you do that, if you cut out the I do it part of the I do it, we do it, you do it, I think they might not, they might not get a clear picture. So I don't hold back on saying what I think. I just don't try to talk them into thinking the way I think. I think you should say, if you think they're doing something that's not going to work, I think you can. What Miller and Rolnick say from motivational interviewing is, I don't take sides. So I just say, from my perspective, if you don't have behavior in place before you do the cooperative learning activity, I'd be really worried that cooperative learning will just take the kids more off task. What do you think about that? And so you might call that challenging. It's not meant to be challenging. I'm just putting it out into the conversation, and then they can give their perspective. So I think people learn how to think by thinking, and I'm trying to set up. To me, coaching is a thinking partnership. It's a dialogical engagement between two people. That's how I would see it. But I want to go back to the basic thing. I'm trying to create the conditions where the person I'm working with can set a goal that really matters to them, that will have an unmistakably positive difference in kids, and then go after the goal. I'm not trying to get them to do what I think they should do. However, if they pick something that I think is probably a problematic goal for some reason, if they struggle, then I'm going to say, well, what about these things? I'm not going to try to talk them into it, because I think the moment I try to talk them into it, it becomes polarized. I just say, what about these ideas? What do you think about this? So they feel like I actually honor their capacity to think. And then when I say, so what do you think you might do to hit that goal? And they go, well, I got nothing. Then I'm not going to sit there and say, well, keep thinking till you come up with something. I'm going to say, well, here are 4 or 5 possible things. Which one gives you the most confidence? And then once they pick a strategy, I'm going to describe it. I might even model it. But when I describe it, I say, now you might want to do it differently. And what if the teacher says, I want to butcher the strategy. I want to do it in a way that nobody would ever think was going to work. Is that okay with you? I would say, well, I wouldn't do it for those reasons. Here are my reasons. But we have a goal. We can try it. Let's see if it hits the goal. If it hits the goal, great. If not, we'll come back. We'll look at the checklist. Usually right then they'll go, oh, yeah, well, it probably wouldn't hit the goal. And so it's this conversation between two equals, two professionals. I have way more expertise in effective instruction, but they know a lot more about their kids. They might know a lot more about their discipline than I do. And so I just show up with these ideas. I think if somebody really wants to learn formative assessment, and I've worked with Rick Stiggins for 5 years in Portland, Oregon, gone out to his conferences, read all his books, it's kind of silly for me to sit there and go, I got nothing. I want to involve them in the conversation. But if I try to talk them into it, it becomes a problem. It's where I help respond to their goals, and I give them a chance to think it through. That's where I think you get the real action, what's really happening.
And here's something just on like an organizational level as well that kind of ties into what you're saying there. So the question is that I'd love to put to you is that, to what extent is it important that you consider the position that the coach holds in the organization when you're pairing people up? So for example, if I just take the example that you just gave, so if me as the deputy head goes into watch an ECT, and I'm coaching that ECT, and I say and I'm having that coaching conversation with them, and they come up with an idea, and I say, well, my idea wouldn't be that. My idea would be these. But what do you think? Implicit in that, because I hold that position of deputy head, implicit in that could very, very easily be, oh, well, he's the deputy head, he said it, so I better do it. Now, I would love to think that the ECTs, the early career teachers in my school, don't think like that, because I feel like I've worked pretty hard to kind of cultivate this culture whereby people can challenge and push back and ask for justification about my opinions as much as they can anybody else's. But is there a risk there that if you don't, and I guess, back to the question, to what extent is it important to consider the coach's role within the organization when you're pairing up coaches and teachers?
So see, this is a big difference between North America and the United Kingdom. So our coaches are full-time employees. That's their job.
Right.
But that doesn't mean a principal can't take a coaching approach. The biggest challenge with principals taking the coaching approach or other kind of administrative positions is they don't have the time. So the time it takes to walk through a whole cycle is challenging. That's why, when I first started studying this 25 years ago, my colleagues told me it was a complete waste of time because schools would never have the money for instructional coaches. But now it's probably, one of the top professional development models in the United States and other parts of the world, because people realize you don't get quick fixes, don't solve problems, and you have to go deep. But you're on to something really important, which is that I think hierarchy messes with people's capacity to engage equally. It goes both ways too. I mean, often Bob Sutton in his book, Good Boss, Bad Boss, talks about how when you become a boss, you sometimes lose empathy for the people that you used to be a peer with, and now you're looking down on them and you lose your capacity for empathy. And I think it goes the other way too. Sometimes when one of your colleagues becomes an administrator, we see them stereotypically and we don't see the real person. So hierarchy messes things up both ways. But I still feel like for an administrator to take a coaching approach is better than not having an administrator needs a repertoire of ways of interacting with people. Sometimes coaching is appropriate. Sometimes directive is appropriate. Somebody's being bullying kids in class, or they're unprofessional in some way, that has to be dealt with directively. But if the person's trying to set a goal, then I take a coaching approach. So I think it's more difficult to be perceived as a peer when your role is clearly different. But still, you do what you can. Everything's complicated, so you do what you do with what you've got. But I would argue that or advocate for schools in the United Kingdom to start experimenting with full-time coaches, a person whose job is to be the person who translates research into practice. They're the first learner in the school, and they build connections, they build learning. Just like you might have a curriculum coordinator or some other position like that. This is the person who, when you're struggling, you go to them and you say, "I've got this issue. What do you think I should do?" And I mean, to change your behavior, which is what we're talking about, to really change the way you do things, doesn't happen superficially. It takes some kind of intense support. And so I'm always, there should be full-time coaches. That's the way to go.
I think what you're hitting on there is something that in mine and Adam's degree, our masters, which is where we met and where EduPulse was born, one of the key texts was why would anybody
be led by you?
Goffey and Jones.
Yeah.
And they were really advocating for the authenticity of a human being in the role of leadership. And some of the stuff you're touching on here is about not necessarily that very scripted Goldman golf caddy analogy, but more that if the culture of the school is right and the leadership is vulnerable and has an authenticity about them, that disparity we're talking about, where the leaders rise to the top and they're far too important to talk to the people at the bottom. And I think that maybe when we started recording, that's what I was perhaps referring to with a bit of a cultural difference. In the UK, you will find schools where everyone's a coach and everyone's a coachee, and you've got that cyclical approach. And it would be amazing to have a system where we had full-time coaches, and with a general election just around the corner, maybe an incoming government might be persuaded to have that kind of approach. But certainly it seems to me that there's more of an educational leadership theory that you're talking about here that would lend itself to somebody like Adam, who I know has done a lot of work to become a relatable coach, that his position as coach comes before his position of hierarchy within the school. And clearly that's important.
But you know what, Chris, that's so important. I think there's a big part here that will probably explain to an extent some of the differences that people are hearing from Jim's views and the views that I'm presenting as well. So just to be super clear to listeners that might not be familiar with this. So in the US, it's not uncommon. In fact, it's more common now, right? To have people who are employed as instructional coaches, like that is their job. Whereas in the UK, instructional coaching is a role or an activity that is taken on by people in addition to their normal job.
And it's voluntary.
So, yeah, usually. So you end up, and I think by definition there, what you end up with is the person that I'm coaching, I've already got a relationship with them. And that relationship has already been defined as either deputy and teacher, or teacher and teacher, or teacher of 6 years, teacher of 2 years, or whatever the dynamic is between them. And I think that therefore lends itself to that relationship being the start point for their coaching relationship, which is where I think you do get naturally, or I've always found in my career anyway today, that you naturally get that challenge and that if it's done right, the psychological safety within that challenge, because it's embedded within the culture of the relationships that you already have with those people. So me as the deputy head, if I want to bring about a change in the school and I present something to a group of staff and I go, okay guys, this is the challenge that I'm suggesting. Anybody see any blind spots here? So they're able to challenge me back, and then I'll go away and I'll retweak it and stuff. And then when we settle on exactly what it is we're going to do, I then go, okay, so what is it that I should, as the leader of this, what is it that I should be monitoring? So I'm not going to tell you what I monitor. You tell me what are the bits that you're still kind of stuck with and wrestling with. And that's the bit that I should be monitoring, right? Because then monitoring can be supportive. And so, again, people have that opportunity to come back and go, well, I think maybe this bit, and then they're challenging each other. And so because you've got that natural relationship of challenge within your working relationship anyway, it feels more natural that could spill over into how you interact as coach and teacher as well, which is perhaps one of the things that's at the heart of this difference that we've got here around this issue of challenge. What do you think, Jim?
Well, I think peer-to-peer coaching can be really powerful. Let's say you and I are together in a school, Adam, and we're working together, and so we would say that, and we've developed a process called peer video coaching that addresses this. But the way it would work would be, I would video record my class. I would share the video of my class with you. You would video record your class. You would show the video of the class with me. We'd both watch each other's video. And then I'd ask you some coaching questions. I'd say, okay, so, the scale question or whatever it might be. And we work down to creating a peer's goal. And you would do the same thing with me. And I think there's real power in that reciprocity of me coaching you and you coaching me. I think that's really a good thing. But to make that work, first off, we'd have to have the capacity. There's really four sort of circles in a Venn diagram that I think are important for coaching. One of them is the beliefs that guide what you do. So we have an approach called the partnership approach, which is we recognize the primacy of choice in relationships. We engage in a dialogue with the other person. We see coaching as a reciprocal conversation. We believe the other person's voice is really important. And there's other principles related to the partnership approach. That's our way of being. Second thing is we have a coaching process. We use what's called the impact cycle. And so the coaching process helps us figure out where we are, where we want to get to, how we're going to get there. And then that might be as far as you can get with peer coaching. The third part is the coach has coaching skills. So I'm a good listener. I ask good questions. I might be really good at sharing positive information, but for sure, listening and questioning. I'm from Canada, so I have hockey analogies. So I say listening and questioning are to coaching like skating is to ice hockey. You can't play hockey, not just ice hockey, but you can't play hockey unless you can skate. And I think if you're not listening and questioning effectively, it's going to be hard to be an effective coach. So way of being, coaching process, communication skills, and then those two things I talked about, we call it strategic knowledge, but understanding data and understanding teaching practices. So if your district has invested a lot of time in learning Sherrington and Coviglioli's teaching walkthroughs, and they learn a lot about teaching walkthroughs. Once we set the goal, and we could work it out. You could say to me, now, which of the walkthroughs do you think might help you here? And let's talk about what it would look like, and vice versa. So I think you can do an impact cycle type process in peer video coaching. It isn't something we've studied with the same in-depth study we've shown to instructional coaching, but I think it's going to be better than nothing to go through that process. Go ahead.
I'm already hearing things just that are really making me question sort of my more recent decisions in terms of things that I want to see. Why do I want to see them? Then the genuine motive is because I know it's going to be beneficial for the young people, but the people who have to deliver that, and I'm actually sat here thinking through some of the decisions I've made in the past 6 months, Jim, and looking at myself in the mirror and thinking, actually, particularly the impact cycle part. I think I need to go back to the drawing board on a couple of things here. I feel like I've had a mini coaching session, indirect. I
Do
feel
you,
really
Well,
vulnerable right now.
do you
we've
feel
been making
challenged?
mistakes. We've been making mistakes for 25 years, so I'm glad that it's of some use. I guess that is a concern of mine, is I feel like we really have looked at this pretty carefully. I got 10 books, maybe more, I don't know how many exactly, but at least 10. And they have a lot of ideas that are really grounded in a lot of reading I've done, not to mention day-to-day coaching for like over a decade. And we continue to do research with different people. And so I don't feel like we're not done learning. It's going to be like, if you look at the book Instructional Coaching, came out in 2006, 2007. I'm revising that because I'm like almost embarrassed that anybody would read that book. We've changed so much since then. We've learned so much. So it is an ongoing, growing thing. But I hope people will access what we've learned as they do what they do. Because I think to jump right in and say, this is about me telling teachers what to do and observing, I think that's, if it works, do it. But my guess is in many cases, it's not going to be as effective as doing what we've learned along. When I started as a professional developer, that was my approach. Look, research has been done. You need to do it the way the research says. I'm not going to give you the book unless you promise to do it the way I say. And I could feel the dynamic wasn't working. I could feel this just wasn't healthy. And I could see the teachers weren't happy about the conversation. And so that's how I started to look at partnership. How can we have a different kind of conversation that's going to be more likely to lead, and nobody implement? So that's really what the genesis was for a lot of these things.
I think just to make the point as well there, just because, you mentioned partnership principle there, for anyone that's interested, and everybody should be, partnership principles is page 17 of Jim's definitive guide to instructional coaching, which is one of the most accessible books on instructional coaching that I've come across. I dug it out the other day to reread it when we were kind of prepping for this podcast. And if anybody is interested in delving into that, particularly if you're interested in thinking about professional development and instructional coaching on a cultural level, the partnerships principles chapter is something that I think everybody would find really useful. And Jim, if you are ever obviously looking for for a couple of school leaders who might be willing to get involved in any of the research that you're delving into, and you want to try and do something across the water in the UK, then do think of us, because we'd be thrilled to be involved.
I'm already signing you up. We need to do it next year. Absolutely, without question. And there is a version of the definitive guide published by John Catt that's grounded in the UK. There's an American version and a British version, but I would say there's also tons of stuff on our website that's free, so you don't have to buy a book. So if you go to instructionalcoaching.com and you just look in the resources section, there's something like 700 different things: cases, forms, checklists. There's at least one set of 7 blogs about the partnership principles. So you can find, and there's videos, all kinds of stuff. And there's a podcast I have with a lot of coaching leaders. So
your podcast
how powerful podcasts are. So
yeah, well, your podcast, just to give that a bit of a shout out as well. Again, anybody that's interested in listening to more stuff on instructional coaching, Jim's podcast episodes are fantastic. They're really, really great listening. And I think something that the reason that Chris and I kind of started EduPulse in the first place really was about this idea of broadening the conversation. And one of the ideas and principles that underpins that is the idea of questioning that of which you're most certain about. And even throughout this whole conversation, there's a lot of ideas that you've put out there that have really challenged my belief systems about instructional coaching. And it'll definitely give me a lot of thinking to do to take away. And I guess I would just urge anybody that's listening, whatever kind of career stage you're at, if you're listening along and thinking, oh, I'm not sure that tallies with my experience, and actually my experience so far feels like it's been pretty good, just come back to that idea of, question that of which you're most certain, and you'll probably keep learning for longer if you do that. Jim, have we got time for one more thing?
Yes, and then I want to do one little plug at the end. I want to talk about the presentations I'm doing in the UK in a couple of weeks. I don't know if this will be posted before that, but I'm going to be in the UK the 2nd, 3rd, 4th.
Do you know what we can do is, even if it's not posted before then, like we will absolutely push that out on the EduPulse feed as well. So you just let us know when those dates are. Yeah, so the one more was just the importance of modelling and rehearsal. It's something that's getting a lot of conversation space at the moment over here in the UK. I was just really curious to get your thoughts on the importance of modelling and rehearsal, and what modelling and rehearsal might look like in different contexts.
Well, I think the person needs to learn the practice, and so we would say a really clear explanation done dialogically, where I go through probably a checklist, and not everything requires a checklist, but in most cases, I need to be really, really clear. I need to be able to explain it in ways that the other person can use it. And so if it's not actionable knowledge, it's not helpful. So a really clear explanation is important. And then some form of modeling. Now, we found modeling happens in 6 different ways, and not everything requires modeling. Maybe it's a curriculum tool, or it's about a planning tool. I don't see a model of that, but more than likely, people need to see it. Now, they won't want to see it unless they really want to learn the strategy. But if they really want to learn the strategy, they'll say, if I could see that, it would be helpful. So the 6 ways that we would do it are, first off, I go in the classroom and I model for the teacher. Now, what we found is you don't teach the whole lesson. You just model the practice itself. Teachers tell us they don't want us to do the whole lesson. We just do the thing itself. We could co-teach. And so maybe the teacher, for example, I might not know the content. So if it's trigonometry or Japanese, which are about the same for me, I'm going to probably say you do the content, but I'll model how to use the learning map, and that could happen. I could model it in the classroom without the kids there. For example, let's say we're doing gradual release, or I do it, we do it, you do it. I could sort of do it, and the beauty of doing it without the kids there is the teacher can stop you and say, well, why would you do it this way? Why wouldn't you do it that way? So you can do that in the classroom. You can go with the teacher or send the teacher on their own. You cover their class to go watch somebody else do the practice. But there is power in seeing it done with your kids. Or you could watch a video of the practice, or some combination. Now, we found that going in the classroom and modeling isn't effective in some circumstances. If I don't know the content, I probably shouldn't be modeling. I should probably be doing co-teaching or watching another teacher. And also, if the problem is behavior and I go in and model, what I'm probably going to do is disempower the teacher, because the kids are going to look at me. This is what we found. Kids will look at me, the coach, and say, wow, everybody's sitting up straight and listening. He's got us in control, but our regular teacher doesn't have us in control. And it erodes the power base of the teacher, so it's not particularly helpful. So if you want to learn, if you want to give people a chance to see behavioral practices, probably better to watch a video, maybe co-teach, maybe go see another teacher do it. Probably that doesn't work. In terms of rehearsal, it's not a part of what we do. I'm not for it or against it. We do it in the classroom. And so now that I've described the practice, and now that you've heard me do it, let's get in there and try it out and see what we can do. We feel the real life is where it happens. But I want to learn more about it. It's not been the way we've done it. We're always trying to be as efficient as possible. What I do know as a sports coach, back to hockey, is that I could teach kids plays, but then when the game started, they would completely forget the play. And so I don't know if there needs to be whatever that word is, intermediary stage between explanation, modeling, and practice. We just jump right to practice, but I think it's worth exploring. It's a good thing to think more about.
Do you know? I think there might be some value in it, and where I think there is.
I don't discount it. It might depend on the strategy too. Some might need more than others.
Yeah, where there might be some value in rehearsal, perhaps, is where if a teacher's modeling something, or if a teacher's rehearsing something in that low stakes environment where there are no kids there, and the coach can go, okay, stop right now, like let's hit the pause button, right, let's step out of that rehearsal mode and go, right, what are the options that you've got now?
Yeah, we wouldn't do that.
You wouldn't do that.
No, because we think there's more than one way to do it, and we don't want to. We think it's not one size fits one. It's one size. It's not one size fits all. It's one size fits one. You have to modify the strategy. So there's no one right way to do it. That's a core belief of ours. Because if rehearsal is to do it the one right way, I'm not for that. I think
no.
That's why I think maybe jumping right to what's happening in the classroom makes more sense, because what's going to work for this group isn't going to work with this group. And so we have to, like I said, cold calling might be really great in a high functioning class. But if I have 3 kids who are neurodiverse, how am I going to do that? If that might send them right off. They might be outraged by being called. You have to think about every classroom is going to be a little bit different. And so I think, so now I'm less inclined to go for rehearsal. I think because you have to apply it in real life. Chris, go for it.
No, there's a semantic thing here because I'm from a performing arts background, and so the word rehearsal to me is a word of safety. It's a place where mistakes can happen. It's a thing that can be interrupted and transduced, and it can be expanded upon. And then something you said, Jim, is something we say to performing arts students is, I can teach you all the technique, but eventually when you get out on that stage and you sing that song or you perform that piece, I'm not there, and you are going to revert back to habits. And so then as a teacher of the performing arts and then as a performer myself on the side, I have to work on what I know will be my habits, what will be my default mode, and I have to work on what that is going to be. So I'm taking this entirely out of teaching. I'm saying from a kind of a performance point of view of performing a skill that I've learned. So maybe it's, again, like the word challenge, the word rehearsal to me. If somebody stopped me mid rehearsal, I'd be like, yeah, it's a rehearsal. Please go ahead, do what you want. Right. It's a very weird.
So here's what I think. First off, the Tragically Hip has a great Canadian band. The Tragically Hip has a line, something like, "No dress rehearsal, this is real life." So my strategy here. But my friend Michael Hoke, as a director of the Center for Research on Learning at the University of Kansas, and my colleague, we've written a lot together and studied together. He looked at tutors working with students. He trained the tutors on how to do the tutoring, and then he watched the tutors working with students, and they did everything they'd always done. They didn't apply any of the things they'd learned. Then he had them watch video with a checklist of what they were supposed to do, and then their behavior changed. So I'd be more inclined to have a video of the teacher after they practice, have them look at it with a checklist and look what they're doing. I think that's probably going to be more powerful than rehearsal. But I don't know if there's evidence that says rehearsal works. If there's studies that have been done that prove it, I'd love to see them, but I don't know that they exist.
It's tricky, isn't it? I mean, I think where we definitely agree is on this idea that it's got to be something that these choices have got to be driven from the teacher. I guess that, and when we talk about rehearsal in coaching, certainly over here anyway, we're not talking about, okay, coach is going to sit back and check that teacher's doing it right. It's, okay, coach is going to sit back, teacher's going to have a go, and again, it's not so much about the coach intervening, but where I've used it anyway, and this is purely anecdotal, and like I said, what I'm taking from this conversation a lot is actually this thing about questioning that of which you're most certain. So where I've used it a lot is the teacher will get to that pivotal point where I know I really want to zoom in on something, but what I want to zoom in on is their thinking and their process. So I might go, okay, I'm going to just pause right there. Tell me what you're thinking. What are your options for what you're going to do next? Talk me through what those options are. Talk me through the different contexts where you might go with A, or you might go with B, or you might go with C. So, they might say, oh, well, if I'm going to cold call, if that's a strategy we're working on, if I'm cold calling and I want to cold call Johnny, well, actually, I'm going to choose not to cold call him there. I'm going to give some think, pair, share time, and I'm going to make sure I go and prep Johnny with an answer, and then I'm going to cold call. So it's thinking through all those options by, in that moment, pressing pause, which I guess if you delve straight into the classroom, you don't have that thinking space. You can't give the teacher that thinking space.
Yeah. I'd say if it works, keep doing it. And Annie, there's nothing wrong with what your evidence shows. I feel like they would, my immediate reaction is, I think they'd learn more by watching a video and reflecting on what they were doing by looking at the video.
Right.
But I'm open to being convinced. I think whatever's going to make it easy. To me, like, we identify, learn, improve. That's our cycle. And the purpose of the learn stage is to make it as easy as possible for the teacher to implement effectively. And so I wouldn't discount that as a possible way of getting better at it. We just dive right in and look at the practice, and then we measure its effectiveness by changing kids. And I think it's worth exploring for sure. But if the idea is you teach this checks for understanding strategy the same way. I want the same thing happening in every class the same way. We would say that's problematic because classes are so different and teachers are so different. I want it to be driven by the needs of the students. That's how I'd want it to go. So I'm gonna give my little update on the presentations in the UK. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. Please do, because this podcast will be going out on Saturday the 22nd, because I'm going to dedicate the next day to put it. So listeners, it's if you're listening to this on or after the Saturday the 22nd of June, then Jim, please tell us when you're going to be in the UK. This is very exciting.
So July 3rd, I've been invited by the Festival of Education to spend a day doing a workshop on the definitive guide to instructional coaching. It's $30. Well, excuse me, 30 pounds. So it's really, really inexpensive. And which means I'm getting nothing out of it, but I want to promote the idea of instructional coaching. And I don't know where it is, but if you email me, Jim @Instructional Coaching, I'll find out. I'll get back to you so you can know.
It's Wellington College.
It's at Wellington College, but we're at a different location, I think, for the all day presentation. But it's going to be near Wellington College. So if you're going to the Festival of Education, if you just go a day earlier, you can see that. On the 4th, Tom Sherrington and I are doing a keynote together at Festival of Education about a school in Bangkok we've both worked with, where they're using our instructional coaching model and they're doing teaching walkthroughs. Tom and I don't fully agree on everything, which will make it really fun. But I have enormous respect for him. And I think he's a great learner, and I consider him a friend. So I'm excited to have the conversation about what's happened at Patna School in Bangkok. And then on the 5th, I have an all-day strand at the Festival of Education on coaching. I'm doing a little bit. And Christian Van Nieuwerburg is going to do a presentation on growth coaching. And then some folks from Collective Ed are going to do a presentation on Nancy Klein's work on thinking spaces. And then Ian Henderson, who's the director of the Festival of Education, is going to talk about coaching at Wellington. And we have a panel discussion to talk about coaching. So if you're interested in multiple perspectives on coaching, the 5th, if you're at the festival, that's your place to go, I think, to get a lot of different perspectives on it. I love the growth coaching model. I love Nancy Klein's work. I think Collective Ed is one of the best things going in the United Kingdom. It's great what they've accomplished. And great, excited to hear what Ian's going to be sharing about Wellington. So it's going to be a great day. And then after that, I got nothing. That's the whole thing.
There's so many different voices and so many different perspectives, and that's, like I say, that's why we founded EduPulse, really, to kind of try and bring that broader slant to the conversation, I guess. But Jim, can people still get tickets for all that?
I think so. Yeah, I don't know, but they can email me and I'll find out, or somebody will find out. I'm going to hold you to it, though. What I'm thinking is we should do a series of EduPulse things where you guys try out the coaching model and come back and we have a candid, honest conversation about what works. I think that'd be pretty exciting.
Chris, did you get that on record?
I did, and anyone driving in their cars on their way to work can hold us to account as well. Jim, right. This has been it's been an honour and a privilege to sit really this evening and chat with you. And as I said, it's been incredibly powerful and reflective. And so I only hope that our broad audience, we have a small audience, but it is broad. We have listeners in Pakistan, we have listeners in Bangkok, actually, Australia, and North America. So we've got quite a thin but large spread. So it's quite lovely. But listen, everybody who will eventually come across this, I'm sure will take a lot from the discussions we've had tonight. So thank you so much.
Take care, gentlemen. Thank you so much. And I know it's getting late.
Thanks so much, Jim.
Appreciate you fitting it in. Take care.
Cheers, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
We'll be back soon with more conversations and advice for those of you starting your teaching career, and head-nodding moments with our special guests. As ever, please head over to Twitter and join in the conversation @EduPulseCo, and we'll see you next time.